приехал к нам из Египта. Ну, конечно, наверное, большинство знают Египет как страну пирамид и вообще какого-то древнейшего наследия, но тем не менее, оказывается, там есть модернизм, его даже сохраняют. Вот Даниэль нам расскажет об одном таком кейсе. Пожалуйста.
Thank you very much for the introduction. In this case, I would like to present a project that is about archival processing. So, next please. So this is me, next slide. So it's about reading architecture through archival processing. It was very interesting, the presentation of Mr. Dimitrov, how he was talking about the danger, things that can come to buildings, and how to protect them. And I believe that the archives and the proper documentation of buildings are the first defending lines to any building. So next please. My presentation is about a chapel that is situated in a building that is a school that was built in 1889, so 127 years ago. And then there was an expansion to this old building to build a chapel and new buildings for classes for students to make this school bigger. So this was the work of three alumni, previous students of this school, architects who were Antoine Selim Nahas, Sadiq Shahabuddin, and Dimitri Lakomidis, who were a Catholic, an Orthodox, Christian, and a Jew, and a Muslim, sorry. And what was interesting in this project that these students were actually users of this school, and then they were commissioned the project of building a chapel for the school. And this project was led by an artist who was called Jean Mascatelli, who was the leader of the movement of art and liberty in Egypt, which was one of the avant-garde movements for the art scene in Egypt in the 1950s, in the time of the rise of the modernist architecture in Egypt. So next please. Okay, thank you very much. So I was a student in this school, so it is a personal relationship of me inside this building for 14 years. And this is how it looks from the inside, and this is not the common churches you can see in Egypt. This is a very special structure and a very special architecture of a chapel in the context of Egypt. And one of the most characteristics of the city of Cairo that it has buildings that is ancient and it's classified as a heritage building, but it is a living heritage building. So this building is used 5 times a week. Buildings are still used 5 times every day in Egypt. So this is a used building actually.
كنيسة أرثوذكس.
And this project started as a photography documentation for a building in 2020, like 5 years ago, by 2 colleagues of mine, George and Samuel Mohsen, who started doing the documentation of this building through photography. And they contacted me at that time to join them as a specialist or as a professional that is involved in the architectural work to do the architectural analysis. And then I couldn't accept this at that time because I thought that I was not ready to do that, and then I joined them 1 year later. So my story with this building starts from the archive. And one interesting story that the architect who did this building, or the main architect or the lead architect of this project, who was called Antoine Selim Nahas, he lost his archives from his office, and his work was not really well documented. And this building was his second biggest building ever he did, and his biggest building in Egypt, in Cairo. And his first building was in Beirut, the National Museum of Beirut. And our work was about, we found these drawings in the archive of the school, and we documented and scanned and analyzed these drawings, and we started to dig out of this findings very interesting information about this time of doing architecture. And then, parallel to the drawings, we have found a lot of letters and meeting notes that was documenting the process of this building. And this building was done in 1955, and this was the time of a war, the tripartite war, where there was the aggression on Egypt at that time. So this project, it tells the story of the war through the architecture of the building, and this was all documented through these letters and meeting notes. And what is really interesting in the archives, that the archival work of an architectural building or of the architecture starts even before the design process, or before we have a building actually. It starts from the first intention or the first letter from the client to the architect, or from the architect to the glassmaker, and so on. So we can trace through the letters and the drawings, because we have in the drawings handwritten notes that show changes that happened in the architecture or in the design, and how this was reflecting the political stance at that time. So this is me looking at archival photos, and then in this project we used to look through photos, and then we understood that if we have a proper archive of photos, we can understand the letters or the meeting notes, both in text and visually, and we can start doing relationships between the written history and the visual history of the project. So, for instance, in the letters we can find that the school wanted to do colored stained glass that is made of a technique that is called dalle de verre, which was imported from France at that time, and because France was one of the countries that was attacking Egypt in the war of 1956, so to import things from France was prohibited. And then we find that the monks or the directors of the school, they had a relationship with the president of Egypt, Nasser, at that time. And we realized that they let this glass pass for this project, for instance. And then we found that in the letters, the specialists of glass, which were coming from France, they had to leave the country for the war, so we can find the monks going to the construction site and working on the construction themselves with the school workers. And talking about the documentation, we had to take photos for the current situation of the project or of the building, and then starting doing the analysis of it and remodeling this building to start understanding the architecture features of it and how it was affected by the modern time or the modernist ideas. So you can find that it's a building that is floating from the ground, and it follows the open plan, and then it was really affected by the modernists at that time. However, if we look deeper into the drawings and into the architecture, we can find that there are uses of proportional systems, for instance, that are derived from the ancient Egyptian architecture. So this is a comparison between the section of the Hatshepsut temple and the chapel section, and we can see that the proportional system that is used is the same. It is the square roots growth of a unit, and it forms the section of both the Hatshepsut temple and the chapel. And same goes to the comparison of the facade of the chapel and the National Museum of Beirut, which was done by the same architect in Beirut, which had again the ancient Egyptian style in it, which is very interesting. This was in the 30s and the chapel was in the 50s, and he used the same proportional system in it. And one of the documentation processes that we did was the close-up examination of the glass that was made by Gabriel Loire, who was one of the most famous glassmakers at that time. And his studio is in Chartres, France, and we had the whole story of how this glass was made. And this is my colleague Georges visiting the grandsons of this artist in their studio in Chartres, which they still do the same technique there, and they even exchanged archival material from their studio with us in order to understand how this technique is done and what was the idea behind each drawing and what was the manifesto behind each icon they did. And our intention from this project is to re-examine the power of archives in protecting architecture or protecting the city. So we wanted to do a temporary exhibition to show how a single building can have a very big story and have so much details, and how a building can hold a history of a nation. And we will do this in the form of a temporary exhibition, a book, a permanent archive exhibition that will be in the church itself, and we have actually started doing guided visits for students and professionals and architects and people who are interested in such topics to raise this kind of awareness of the importance of archives. So I thought this was my answer to what we can bring to the third millennium. I think it's the power of understanding the importance of archives and how they can protect buildings and how we can move forward from this point. And that's the team from left to right. Samuel Mohsen, photographer, George Mohsen, photographer, and myself doing the architectural analysis and archival processing work. Thank you very much.
Я так понимаю, что это часовня. Я так понимаю, что это часовня, это такой центр хранителей наследия, да, станет, если там будут храниться как бы архивы, и хотите как раз популяризировать в принципе сохранение наследия, да, через те мероприятия, которые будут проходить в часовне.
Yes, exactly. So if we look in the presentations that were before me, any architectural work that starts, it has to look back to the story and where it comes from and where it wants to go. So if we do not have the proper documentation and proper archives that help the professionals to work on such questions, we cannot protect buildings, we cannot do new architecture, we cannot move forward properly. So this is, I think, the question that we are looking into, and what are the tools that are in the third millennium that allow a new idea or a new thinking of how to deal with archives. So this is my take on the question.
Thank you very much. Сергей Небутов. Сергей, я, конечно,